And I'm Sean Keithley, the president of Adrenaline. We are an experience design agency, and we bring branded experiences to life for our financial service clients, really focusing on portfolios you heard this morning, whether it's new branch initiatives or existing branch locations. I've got Gina with me on stage. She's in our executive suite. It's our chief experience officer. And Gina's going to kick us off.
So here's what we're going to discuss today, a few different areas of learning. The first area is about how to create a branch of the future experience that stays relevant. The second is how to export that across various formats and tiers across your entire network. And the third is how to design the right level of change for your organization. So let's start with learning area number one, creating a branch of the future experience that stays relevant. So branch of the future, one of my favorite terms. So how many of you have a branch of the future in your organization? A branch of the future initiative or a branch of the future location? Oh, timid hands, but a lot of hands. So branch of the future is a little ironic because the future will never actually be here. It really is a journey. It's an ongoing initiative to create the ideal embodiment of your branch experience. But what we find many of our clients lose sight of, it must be headed towards a North Star. The North Star, you'll never actually get there. Future will never actually be here. But everything you do should be headed towards that North Star. And more importantly, and more challenging, that North Star is in constant evolution to keep up with the forces of change. There are external forces of change. That includes new technologies, things we haven't even heard of that emerge, digital disruption. That includes evolving consumer expectations. That happens because of the emerging technologies. When a new technology comes out, as you well know, consumers all of a sudden expect everything to be up to speed with that latest technology. And then there's a changing competitive landscape. There are new entrants. There are non-banks. There are digital disruptors all over the place. And even though the U.S. is only about 1% digitally disrupted so far, that is changing expectations. It's changing the landscape of what consumers can do. And then there's internal forces of change within your organization. So as you expand your network, as you have mergers and acquisitions, as you have network renovations come up, critical upgrades that need to be made, and then branding and staffing changes within your organization. Are you reinventing yourself? Are you rebranding yourself? Ultimately, when you look at your branch of the future, it should always be on the path to reach that North Star. And that North Star should be constantly evolving with these internal forces of change and external forces of change. And that is no easy task. So what you want to do is think about the versions of your branch of the future. So whenever your branch of the future started, whether it was last year or 10 years ago, maybe you had version 1.0. And then version 1.3, and then version 2.0, and so on and so on. Ideally, all of those are in alignment in a single path towards that constant North Star, which again is just the ideal embodiment of a branch experience. The branch of the future is the journey to get there, and all of the versions are the iterations of that journey that continue to change with the forces of change. The other advantage of being on a linear journey like this is that you can learn from one iteration to the next. Something you thought was going to play out in one way might be totally different when you deploy it in a prototype and maybe people don't use it like you thought they would. The reality of branch of the future initiatives for most of our clients, when we come on board, we find they kind of look more like this, where they're in siloed. And you've heard a lot of talk. We all know banking is siloed, and you've heard a lot of discussions around this, but you might have one region doing something over here and facilities doing something over there, and the marketing team might be trying to do something else. And ultimately, you end up with many disparate versions of a prototype that are kind of skewing all over the place without a common North Star. They're not learning from one another. They're not on the same journey. There's all different architects, all different regionalities. And ultimately, you are not going forward together. You're just kind of splattered all over the place. So think about change. We like to think about change in this way. You have natural change over time that will just occur sporadically because things change over time. The y-axis here indicates positive change. So ideally, you want to be going up, not just changing willy-nilly. Now you have reactive change. Most of you are probably in this reactive change category where you're reacting. My lease is up. A new technology just came out and I want to shove it in a branch somewhere. I want to put some iPads in. A new executive has a new vision for something or other, and you're reacting. And so you have versions of your prototype that are maybe not totally sporadic, but still relatively disparate. What you want to get to is what we call proactive change, where you are ahead of change. You are trying to manage it because you understand the internal and external forces. And ultimately, that gets your prototype iterations more aligned like this. Maybe not in a straight line, but a little more aligned together. Synovus, we partnered with when they were in a situation not totally unlike some of what we were looking at, with various versions of branch of the future iterations. And in 2015, we came together to say, look, let's think of our North Star and let's create prototype iterations that are the ideal embodiment of the experience based on what we know today to be true, what we know about your organization, and then let's learn with each deployment. So our Nashville deployment in 2015 then informed a Sarasota deployment later that year, then informed a Jacksonville deployment. All of them were learning from one another, even if different architects are involved, different teams are involved. The most important thing is that retail, facilities, and marketing all came to the table together. That is absolutely critical. And then another model that we love is America First Credit Union. Their Salt Lake City Innovation Center was actually a place to test and learn what experiences people wanted. What do members actually want? What are the new technologies and how well are they being used? So this space is actually designed to inform that North Star. Having a live living lab where you can test and learn and it's flexible to change is an ideal way to informing your North Star. So your takeaways, your branch of the future is ongoing. It is not one location. It is not a moment in time. It will never end. It is an ongoing initiative. And you need to proactively manage change with a constantly evolving North Star.
And now for the bad news. If that's not hard enough, you've got a rest of your network of locations. And for a lot of people, once they get alignment in North Star, it's not where you end, it's where the journey actually begins. And that's how we think about this next learning objective, is thinking about the rest of your network. A lot of times the rest of your network is someone else's strategy. You've acquired locations over time. And a lot of times, if the dot indicate size of location, if you were to do it today, it's not exactly how you would do it. So this becomes very complicated. We would never, ever, ever embark on the rest of your journey if you haven't done step one, which is align your North Star. Because if you do, you'll be swimming in circles. So now we go through this, and this is where we want to think about really right-sizing your network in the right locations. You've heard it all morning from all the great banks up here that are on these journeys. Formats, locations, client-focused, employee-focused. But this has to continue to iterate, going forward and backward around a North Star that, by the way, is always moving. It's never static. We've got some Branch of the Future projects from the 90s. I don't show people. This stuff changes over time. So then we think about this, and, formats discussion. I had one banker one time telling me, I'm going to make every one of my locations 200 square feet. And I said, that's great, but you've just created a network of transaction centers, because there's absolutely no advice happening there. So you think about this balance, and the more branches you have and the more geography you cover, in a lot of ways, the bigger your challenge. There's a lot of small networks that are attacking this in a net new growth, whereas a lot of new networks like Regions Bank with 1,500 locations, trying to redo this all. If you think about, too, when you're going here, it's got to be hub and spoke. And we talked about the notion of, a client on the West Coast that over the last 8 years has bought 16 banks. And guess what they have? they have 16 former headquarters for those banks. And so how are you right-sizing the locations? There's actually going to be some good sessions this afternoon on if you have extra space. I can assure you the Capital One model won't work for everyone. It's wonderful what they're doing. It's so exciting. But you have to think about what works for your bank, your community, your culture. And a big part of it, though, is reconciling formats. And you heard the gentleman talking from an analytical standpoint about cluster and how branches work together. Then we want to think about a couple of examples where we think people are really doing it well. And they would tell you they're on a journey and they haven't totally arrived. But some examples, a wonderful bank in Boston, Eastern Bank, as they think about formats, they're thinking very, very thoughtfully around the markets they serve, how different they are, very, very urban versus more rural, and what is the right format to put us in a position to create a wonderful client experience. And you have to always be thinking about the employee experience as well. These don't work if you don't have those things aligned. As I mentioned, as you get going, clients that are maybe even a further step ahead, and Ben's going to talk this afternoon at First Tennessee, the second they got their North Star aligned, he said, I'm going to race through my network and start creating that experience in more and more locations that deserve a North Star-like experience. And I heard, the conversation this morning. It's on one hand, one size fits all, and on the other hand, everything's completely custom. You have to find a balance. You will drive yourself crazy if you customize everything and you can't afford it. But if you're not focused by market and micro market on what kind of employee you can actually hire and train and who they're serving, you'll fail. So there are ways to create formats that have maybe what we call design application, which means we're going to customize it to the neighborhood, but we're not going to invent another format. And that's how people start to codify and move faster. And by the way, before I show, I've got Woody in the crowd. How many of you are currently or just recently have been through a merger or an acquisition of some kind? Just raise your hand. I mean, look at the hands. So I talked about how hard it is to create your North Star, how hard it is to have your big network, and most of our innovative clients are continuing to grow and acquire. And there's just more and more of it. And so what we talk about with Woody and his group, some former Chase bankers that have moved back home, and they're reinventing community bank on the east side of Texas and serving those small towns that a lot of other clients don't want to have locations in. But we still have to think about prioritization and tiering and cost. You absolutely cannot go through 30 locations and do wholesale renovation. But if you look at some of their before pictures, they had to do something. As they came back to this bank, the CFO had managed the branch experience. So they hadn't touched it in a long, long time. And now they're bringing brand to life, but in a way that works in their community. And maybe most importantly, where they can attract and retain the right employee to serve their clients. And as their North Star continues to develop, it goes backwards, and they continue to work on it. This is a super important slide, and every one of you should take it back to your organization. All you need to do then is play with the percentages. But the reality is you cannot leave locations as bucket locations. Who knows what a bucket location is? It catches the rain when it drips through the roof, right? And so maybe that needs to become a rebrand location. $20,000. If you can't spend $20,000, why do you have employees there? Okay? Maybe as you acquire networks, it's your first step. We can't acquire a 200 branch location and go renovate it all by brand day one on Memorial Day. It's impossible. And then as you're thinking about renovating, some of you talk about growth markets versus rural community. And even if you want to stay in a rural community and serve those clients, you can't go do growth market-like initiatives. So this is a way we think about renovating, refreshing, rebranding, closing. If you close, have a receiver branch. So it's really just moved. But don't give a receiver branch that looked like the one on the left. It's a horrible message. We've closed your location and we've moved you to the one on the left. Whereas we've closed your location that looked like the one on the left and we've moved you to one on the right. They're excited you closed the location. So again, it's about employee, staff, engagement with client engagement, and it's not one size fits all. Real quickly, as I finish this chapter and let Gina finish for the last 4 or 5 minutes, we wanted to visualize a little bit maybe the things you can accomplish from 20,000 to 600,000 or 700,000. And we're not even getting into exteriors, which by the way, is a huge consideration. Because a lot of you have locations where if I made my decision, if I'd bank with you, based on what I see from the road, I would just keep going. And so thinking about that, what that can mean to you from an investment tier. And that's why it's so important for the guys this morning, Citizens and Patrick, to have analytics around this. What's our growth opportunity? Is this market growing, a competitive landscape? You can do some things very inexpensively to make people proud they work there, and they don't realize that maybe 100 miles away, the new prototype has a little bit different experience that they felt like you didn't forget about. So there are a couple of things we like to talk about, even if you are engaged in branch of the future and Gina's convinced you it's ongoing, think of your network holistically. What is the message you're sending to a community based on how much business you want to do there by the state of the branch, right? And then you've got to find a way to balance experience and expense control. Too many people make decisions on expense control at the expense of experience. So you have to find a way to balance that. So 4 or 5 minutes to design the last piece. Can you do it?
Yeah, that's
easy. Or can we do it tomorrow in a round table?
Well, this last piece, designing the right level of change for your organization, this is where the rubber meets the road. So everything we've talked about is great. You might be, yeah, that sounds great. We believe everything you're saying. We get it. How do you apply this to your organization? And we really think it's about determining the right level of change for you. So consider change over time again, and the difference between just letting change happen and see what happens, to reacting to things going on, to actually getting ahead of it and proactively managing it to achieve positive change. So less change versus more change is a spectrum based on what's right for your organization. You may already be quite innovative, or you may be in the Stone Ages. You cannot go from what that other picture looked like on the left to an Apple store in a month. That's not going to be successful. So think about your branch layout and zones of experience. Think about those external forces of change. Think about what the digital world is doing to your network. What's happening in urban markets is not the same as what's happening in rural markets. What's happening in business is not the same as what's happening in consumer, and what's happening in Seattle is not the same as what's happening in Miami. So you have to think about the internal and external forces that are right for you. You have to think about the branch experience in terms of journey zones, and you have to think about the right experience in each one of those zones. And as branches get smaller, which they are, this gets even more complex because you have zones of experience actually converging. So you've got consult, transact, and even engage all happening in a single one location. So then what do? Well, then you have to consider things like this. So transaction on the left, pods, cash bars, cash automation, you know what that is. Many of you already have it deployed like that. What if you have to start overlapping that with consult areas? So it might look like what you see in the middle, where actually it's a consult area that can also do transactions. And then all the way on the right, you might have an actual consult private office that has an embedded TCR and a way for it to serve 2 different employees. These are all solutions that have various impacts on the branch layout and various implications on staff that can survive and thrive in these types of layouts. And then finally, technology. Technology is so expensive. It's changing all the time. And when it comes to technology in the branch environment, you really have this tier here. So you have self-serve ATMs. Yes, we all know what those are. They're getting smarter and better. You have ITMs. These are staff-led, self-led with remote staffing. But thinking about ITMs, you want to deploy them in areas of very high volume transactions or in remote drive-ups. And then you have something new. This is based on the Teller Infinity model by Glory. It's over in the showroom. And this actually has staff on site. So here you're still making good what the branch environment is for, which is staffing, but giving the customers a way to help themselves as well. And then you have staff-led with TCRs. So thinking about this spectrum of automation to consultation, it's important to deploy it correctly. So ultimately, in learning number 3, figure out how much change you can reasonably sustain and deploy zones that balance efficiency without sacrificing experience and intelligent technology. We're going to be exploring, especially number 3, designing the right level of change for your organization in our Champagne Roundtable tomorrow afternoon.
Time for lunch.
Thank you.